My name is Ben Furness. I'm the Executive Director of the 2030 Project, a university-wide climate research initiative based at the Cornell Atkinson Center for Sustainability. You are at our fall Climate Impact Speaker Series, and so grateful to have all of you here today. Coming up in December, we will have Robinson Meyer, who is the founding executive editor of Heat Map News, which is sort of a premier climate publication. So look for that. That'll be on December 6th, I believe, the first Thursday of December. But tonight, I'm so grateful to have with us Dr. Costa Samaras. Oh, it is December 5th, the first Thursday, which is December 5th. Thanks, Mark. When we were planning this earlier this year, I don't think we wanted to imagine that these were the circumstances that we would be having this conversation. But I'm so grateful that we have you here to sort of share your insights and wisdom and perspective on climate policy in the United States of America in the year 2024 and going forward. Costa, from 2021 to 2024, he served in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, known as OSTP, as the Principal Assistant Director for Energy, OSTP Chief Advisor for Energy Policy, and then OSTP Chief Advisor for the Clean Energy Transition. So a core role at the White House on thinking about the future of climate and our energy system. At Carnegie Mellon, where he is now, he is the director of the university-wide Scott Institute for Energy Innovation, the trustee professor of civil and environmental engineering, an affiliated faculty member in the Department of Engineering and Public Policy, and a courtesy faculty member in the Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy. He was the lead author of the mitigation chapter of the 6th U.S. National Climate Assessment. He's also a founder and director of both the Center for Engineering and Resilience for Climate Adaptation and the Power Sector Carbon Index. Costa, I'm really glad you're here with us and really appreciate it. So thanks for taking the time and welcome. We're going to have a talk from Costa for a little stretch. We're going to have a little conversation here, and then we'll open it up for some questions at the very end. So thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you to Ben and to Cambria and Vern and the Atkinson Center for having me here, and thank you for all of you for taking time to be together today to talk about this super important issue. Until, I don't know, yesterday, this talk had a different title, and the talk was Successful Climate Policy for the Next U.S. Administration. And I wanted to manage some expectations about the things that I had to remove and add to make it relevant for now. But with all of our work and discussion, we're going to talk about this issue that's not going to go away, that we will need to work through together. So I'm going to give a super quick overview of some of the work that we were doing in the White House and talk about the need for energy innovation and deployment to get down to net zero, and then talk about priorities going forward. So instead of successful climate policy for the next U.S. administration, we're going to talk about the priorities that we should set and that we can get done, of the things that need to happen to improve equity, environmental justice, costs, emissions, innovation, jobs, all the things that are important to us. We want to make sure that we're able to continue to advance. So quickly about me, at Carnegie Mellon, my research group is split into generally 3 topic areas. First is we do a lot of analysis and modeling of how different technologies and systems affect emissions, energy, jobs, equity, environmental justice, pollution. And so we do a lot of modeling. That's what that graphic I put in as one of our papers is, what is the life cycle implications of delivering a package on different modes? And we started that project, and I won't go too deep into it, happy to talk more in the Q&A, but we started that project of, are drones better for the environment for a package delivery than a UPS truck? And generally they are, because a drone runs on electricity and it's really small, and even on a per package basis, on a life cycle basis, drone is better. But the exciting, surprising result from that is that e-cargo bikes are even better than drones. So we should be thinking about ways to decarbonize our urban delivery system with technologies that don't create emissions at the tailpipe, because the pollution from that generates health impacts for people who are living there. So that's kind of the first bucket of stuff I do. Second is a lot about impact of AI and automation on energy and society. So how do autonomous vehicles, how does AI and energy use, how do the things that are always continuously going to evolve affect the things we care about? Again, it's a kind of recurring theme. Emissions, equity, environmental justice, jobs. And then last, we do a lot of work around climate resilience. So my lab is kind of part mitigation and part resilience, and so we do a lot of work on using information, climate information, to build a better world for climate impacts. And so we've established one of the first engineering centers for climate resilience, and I've taught a class now for 10 years around how should engineers use climate information to build things that aren't in trouble from sea level rise and extreme rainfall and heat waves and drought. And so for the engineers that are in the room, this is my commercial slide for Carnegie Mellon Civil Environmental Engineering. We'd love to have you as master's or PhD students, and so please come on by. We're a great program that really celebrates interdisciplinary work and across a whole bunch of different areas in transportation and materials, in climate and environment, and in intelligent systems. So happy to talk more about Carnegie Mellon Civil Environmental Engineering. One more short commercial for the institute that I lead. I'm very privileged and lucky to work with a great group of folks at Carnegie Mellon to lead our campus-wide Institute for Energy Innovation, the Scott Institute. We have more than 160 faculty fellows. This is about 10% of the university's faculty. And we are committed to developing the solutions, and those solutions can be on the tech side, they can be policy, business, in the arts and the humanities, to get us down to a net zero climate resilient future. So we're like a little campus DARPA and ARPA. We give out seed awards just like Atkinson Center and other institutes to try to do exciting new research projects that aren't yet viable for funding, to kind of move them from the idea stage to maybe something that they can get an award from National Science Foundation or Department of Energy. And then move them into partnerships with industry, or maybe make their own companies and patents. So we are a seed award institution. We also accelerate research, and so if folks are trying to think about ways to partner with companies or partner with we get research from the government, we are trying to accelerate that, and really with a singular mission of getting us to zero emissions. We also are the home for clean tech innovation and startup, and so we're trying to ensure that the future of technologies that are developed and invented at Carnegie Mellon and in places in the Pittsburgh region make it towards that entrepreneurship ecosystem. And then finally, we're the home. Right? I believe that every student, every undergraduate student, every graduate student, every staff and faculty member and the community member has a home at the Scott Institute to be engaged on clean energy, on climate resilience, on equity and environmental justice. And so I hope that all students will leave their college experience with a deep understanding of how the climate affects whatever field they're going to be in. And that's something that's very important to me. So a list of the things that we've been focusing on. We do work across all of these, all sectors of the economy, all sectors of the energy system. We're really strong in AI, and we've been leaning into how do we think does AI both affect and is affected by the climate, and those are both positive and negative impacts, and we want to make sure that we are designing that system to be people-centered. We do a lot of work in iron and steel making for getting to zero. We do a bunch of work on affordable and equitable electrification in homes and buildings, as well as transportation. And you can talk through some of the rest of the list, but the last one I'll focus on is, we don't see climate resilience and climate mitigation as two separate things that need to be worked on by two separate groups. This is all one challenge of getting us down to zero emissions and building a climate resilient community. And that climate resilient community is tech, yes, and it's nature, of course, but it's also social. And so it's important that we're integrating all of those. So we have an energy week. You all are all invited. It's in March of this year, and we work on lots of different events around campus, just like the Atkinson Center. All right, commercial's over. Now we can talk a little bit about First, the time in Washington. So there are 17 different offices in what's called the Executive Office of the President. And those are the things like OMB and the Council on Environmental Quality and National Security Council. You can see the overhead view of the White House there. That's the South Lawn with the fountain. The building on the left is the Eisenhower Executive Office building, where nearly all of the staff are working in the White House, and that's that building on the bottom right. So the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy was established in 1976 to give the president advice on matters concerning science and technology. It's led by a Senate-confirmed director, and for the first time in the Biden administration, this director is now a member of the cabinet. And this person serves as the president's chief science advisor. Right now, it's led by Dr. Arthi Prabhakar, who had previously led DARPA under the Obama administration. And so there are a bunch of different teams. This is every aspect of science and technology policy: health, security, innovation, society, climate and environment. The Cancer Moonshot is led out of here. A bunch of work on AI and quantum computing, and the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which helps administer the National Climate Assessment. So my role, and I started in the summer of 2021, was the Chief Advisor for Energy Policy to the Director, and then Principal Assistant Director for Energy. And then later on, I was promoted to the Chief Advisor for the Clean Energy Transition. And so there are a bunch of different offices in the White House that deal with climate. You can think about OSTP as thinking for the longer term and setting up the science, technology, and systems that would enable the country to achieve its national aspirations over the long term. And so the work that I was focused on was, what do we need to do to get our emissions down to zero all the way to 2050? So we think about, what do we do from now to 2030 or now to 2035 was handled by some of the other offices, but then we still have to make investments and think about systems for 2035 to 2050. And so that's where I was focused. And because, again, the White House is small, all the things that generally touch energy came through our office in many ways, around AI, around fusion, around crypto, around electrification, and around the ways that climate and energy affect people's lives, which was the most important thing to all of us. One of the things that we launched was thinking about all the different types of areas that need to get attention in order for us to get to zero emissions. And so there's a report. The report is U.S. Innovation to Meet 2050 Climate Goals. It's on the internet. And so this is a figure that we made in this report is, there's a whole bunch of stuff that exists but needs to get better, needs to get cheaper, needs to be more equitable, needs to roll out faster across the emitting sectors, electricity, transportation, industry, buildings, agriculture, and carbon removal, and then a bunch of stuff that are cross-cutting. And so what we did here is kind of short, detailed report of saying, we need a whole bunch of new investment in RD&D to make sure that we are ready for 2035 to 2050, and 2035 to 2050 is not far away. And so we need to be investing in place to make sure that we're ready to deploy now as much as we can, as well as continue to deploy and ramp up our rate of deployment for things like net zero heating, ventilation, air conditioning, or things like net zero aviation, or other opportunities in public transit. So climate innovation was one of our big focuses. So the US currently has a commitment. President made a commitment under the Paris Agreement to reduce the United States' emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. But the president also made a commitment to the country, not inside of the Paris Agreement, to get emissions down to zero, or net zero, no later than 2050 across the entire economy. So a lot of times when we think about, and we show, this is the current published long-term strategy of the United States, we just see this line going down, right? We have a line we're here and we have to line going down. Underneath that is a lot of modeling. But even in the modeling, we were starting to think about what goes into that. How do you make that line a reality? Like, line going down doesn't actually matter unless the emissions go down. And so we spent a lot of time thinking through, building on the agenda that the Biden-Harris administration passed, what do we need to do next? And so what they did so far is, first, the bipartisan infrastructure law. This is demonstrating and building a bunch of things like 500,000 EV charging stations, a huge investment in weatherization and efficiency for low-income homes, demonstrating advanced nuclear and carbon capture and hydrogen, and a whole bunch of projects that require a large investment from the federal government to see how well they work and what needs to be improved. Something that, as a former transit engineer, I was excited that there's the largest investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak, and the largest investment in public transit in the nation's history, as well as the electrification of transit buses and ferries, and a whole bunch of other things where we're burning fossil fuel. That fossil fuel creates pollution, where people, very often communities of color and marginalized communities breathing in that pollution, getting sick. And electrification can help make that better. So, bipartisan infrastructure law, building stuff. Inflation Reduction Act, pulling technologies to the market by making clean energy cheap. And things like renewables, energy efficiency. There are tax credits for individuals to get different energy efficient technology for their homes. There are credits for electric vehicles, both new and used. There's a whole bunch of investment in clean manufacturing. There's something that, again, the way that I like to think about this is, when we've been working in climate policy for the last 20 years, like, any one of these things that if we were able to get done 15 years ago would have been like champagne bottles popping down Constitution Avenue. And it happens to be like, oh yeah, there's also $7 billion for community solar in there. And there's the largest investment in rural and tribal electricity since the New Deal. And so there's a whole bunch of things in the Inflation Reduction Act. There needs to be a lot more, but there's a whole bunch of things in the Inflation Reduction Act that we in the climate community have wanted to do forever. It's also a giant resilience bill, right? And so there's a bunch of climate resilience funding in both of these bills. This is career-defining work that the President and the Congress got done. We got to do more, and so here's why. We submitted a report to the UN for COP28, and so the red line here is our emissions pathway before this administration. The set of blue lines are the emissions pathways with the existing policies in place that we have: bipartisan infrastructure law, Inflation Reduction Act, executive orders. And so it doubled the amount of emissions reductions that we were going to have before. And it will double the amount of clean electricity that we would have had by 2030 relative to before. Now you can see there's a dot there that says, well, that's great, but our 2030 climate target is minus 50% below 2005 levels, and it looks like we're getting to minus 40%, that's true. That is what we're projected to be. If we get implementation right, that we're projected to be kind of minus 40%. That's me on the right at COP28. I was the phone a friend for the State Department, because when they were presenting this, the State Department would get questions from other countries, and they would say, like, how much did we spend on transit buses? And I was like, $5 billion, right? So like we were proud of this, right? And we should be proud of this, because before we had no chance, zero. And now we have a chance to meet our climate commitments, but we have to do more. And so part of the entire agenda was using science, making commitments, making sure that we have both the supply and the demand for clean energy ramping up, making sure that we have all the materials that we need to do, and then tracking it and ensuring that we're rolling it out on time, and making sure that nobody's being left behind and things are equitable. All of that was a giant focus on how this clean energy and carbon mitigation ecosystem was coming together. And so science policy, our role as researchers in this community is to ensure from the outside that it was doing according to plan and going right. So are we doing enough? Is everybody benefiting? Is it equitable? What is our workforce needs, right? What are the finance gaps? Like, they are real live policy questions for making those lines go down. And we tracked all of this at a White House website called invest.gov, and my team was responsible for doing the analysis and getting the power plant and energy storage dots on here. And so there's nearly $1 trillion in total private sector investment that has been announced since the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration, and more than $184 billion in clean electricity and energy storage on the grid. And a lot of that is because of cost declines from the technology, but a lot is Inflation Reduction Act and bipartisan infrastructure law unlocked new ways that these can be cheaper. And so we've seen really a revolution in energy storage on the grid, several Hoover Dams worth of energy storage, things that we would not have thought were possible 10 years ago. So progress, while not complete, was swift and exciting. Here's where we are now. And so we're in a different world tonight. And so now we have to think about, what do we do? What is our responsibility of getting the country and the world down to the world that we want all together? And so there are very important things that we can all do. So the first thing is we need to be building. We need to be building locally the type of resilient and equitable communities that advance environmental justice and build long-term stakeholder coalitions to continue the decarbonization project. And so this is green infrastructure everywhere. It's bike lanes, it's equitable housing, it's resilient building codes. These are things that the federal government generally doesn't do. They provide some money for, but there's a huge amount of agency at your local city council meeting, at your mayor's office, at your county council office, at your public utility commission, at your governor's office, that we in the climate movement, with the very notable exception of our host here, Ben, we sometimes forget about that part of our responsibility to ensure that our elected leaders, from our neighborhood council person up to the president, are delivering on the things that we want. So the first thing is build net zero and resilient, equitable communities. And there's a whole bunch of ways that we can participate in that. And while many states, I think 33 states, have climate action plans, we did an analysis, it was in 2021, but we looked at the biggest cities in every state and any city with more than 300,000 people. So there's like 80-something cities that fall into this, so that every state had coverage and then any larger city. And half don't have a climate resilience plan at all. I mean, and maybe some of them have gotten one since then, but in a city without a climate resilience plan, and some are covered by counties or states, but we need to make sure, wherever you live, that there is a climate resilience plan and a climate action plan, and that it's not just a PDF, but it's got resources, it's got actions, it's somebody's accountable, that it's following through, that it gets updated. So a lot of these we'll find, and it's like 8 years old, 10 years old, and things change, and you need to, it can't just be make a report and put it on the shelf. And so first thing is, go to a council meeting and ask if they have a climate action plan and a climate resilience plan. Two different things. Climate action plan may only be reduce emissions, and climate resilience plan is make sure that our residents are not in danger from extreme weather that is fueled by the burning of fossil fuels. And so on a research side, I promised there would be no equations in this, and so I at least had to have some graph. This is a paper from that same paper that we did that looked at how is rainfall going to change over time in cities. And we did for each one of those cities, those 80 cities, we looked at a bunch of different ways that climate change was going to affect their rainfall. When the atmosphere is hotter, you hold more water, and so you get stronger, more intense storms because there's more moisture in the atmosphere. And all of our stormwater infrastructure was designed for the rainfall patterns of the 1960s-ish. And with even today, the government needs to update the way that we are projecting rainfall under climate change. And so we didn't wait for them. We did it ourselves for every city and place in the country. And what I'm showing here is it's important as researchers to understand and communicate uncertainty in the data, because without going through each one of these, if you design for the red line, the mean here, and you get something on the right side of that, you're saying, hey, we designed for climate change, and you're still underwater. And so making those types of decisions and making sure that they're not maladaptive, making sure that it's not communities that don't have high property values that get flooded, is really the work of state and local workers and governments. So build local resilience. Second, we need housing, and we need housing that's affordable, that's efficient, that's climate resilient, that is accessible, and that is close to where people work, live, and play. And so housing policy is climate policy. If you want to work in climate policy, go work in housing policy, and make sure that we are building for everybody, and we're building so that there is an opportunity that we're reducing commuting emissions in a major way. And inside of that, we have to ensure that electrification is equitable, and that access to cooling is a right. And I think that there's some issues around, air conditioning uses electricity generates carbon dioxide, we should not have air conditioning. And thanks to the work of my colleague, Professor Destiny Knock, and her students, as well as some students that she and I work together with, cooling under climate impacts is disproportionately going to affect vulnerable and low-income households. And it's a policy issue to ensure that folks literally do not die of heat waves. This is a very easy thing to solve. It's making sure that people have access to cooling. This is not a federal government general policy. This is a local issue. And we want to make sure that the cooling is efficient, that the buildings are insulated and efficient, but this is the first wave of impacts that folks are feeling right now from climate change, that not just on the coast, but everywhere. So making sure that we have access to cooling, and that we shouldn't just have a goal of reducing energy poverty, we should eliminate energy poverty. And these are state and local issues that we can advance tomorrow. So I want to say that, as a bike rider who, if you ride a bike, it's dangerous out there, right? And so riding a bicycle by itself is a radical act, because you are vulnerable, you are not prioritized, you're kind of on your own against a 4,000-pound machine that's going way faster than you. And a community that has a critical mass of bike riders becomes a stakeholder coalition. Again, coalition with votes equal action. And so now you as a bike rider are committing a radical act by saying, I want to do something differently, and I'm going to join with the other folks that are doing this to advocate for protected bike lanes and green infrastructure, as well as additional public transit. And so there are opportunities to advance zero and low carbon transportation in our communities that a lot of us think that we're not part of, but we are, both when we're participating in it and when we're advocating for it. All right, I'm going to zip through a bunch of these. I know we want to get to this discussion, which is definitely where I want to get to. But, electrification is the entire ballgame. If we cannot electrify, we are not solving climate change. And we cannot have the entire electrification project rest on the backs of low-income ratepayers who are going to have their electricity bills go up, because that's wrong, and it also is going to stop the project from happening. Right? We are not going to be able to have a durable coalition of folks that are going to say, I'm happy to pay more because of disinvestment in the electricity grid for such a long time. So there needs to be a whole bunch of ideas around new models for local distribution and investment to make sure that the electrification is seen as our state and local highway system. Right? These are things that enable life safety, critical systems, our medical devices, our refrigeration, as well as all the things that we want to be doing. And right now we're treating it as a kind of something that we don't think about. And so it's time, if none of you all have written a letter or talked to your public utility commissioners, that is a great place to start and advocate for the things that we want. And part of that might be virtual power plants. So at Cornell or at Carnegie Mellon or in Ithaca or in Pittsburgh, you could say, we want to ensure that all these new devices that are coming online, heat pumps and cars and induction stoves and dryers, water tanks, that they're connected in a way that's cyber secure, but also in a way that they can be used, deployed as a digital power plant, a virtual power plant. And that's a way that is dramatically can improve efficiency, lower cost, and lower emissions. Again, yesterday this sign said virtual power plants, or this slide said virtual power plants for America. There's no reason why we can't start in our communities. Similarly with clean products, New York State DOT buys a lot of concrete. And as my duty as a civil engineer to tell you that concrete is made of rocks, water, sand, and cement. And when you could have a state buyers club between New York and Pennsylvania to say, we want to buy cement that has half as much CO2 embedded or zero. And you start to build these networks of procurement that say, we, the government, the state government or the local government, is only going to buy products that for our municipal works that have dramatically lower carbon footprints. You can start to create innovation and a market pull in that way. We also have the opportunity to say, we want to prioritize clean delivery, and these are the ways that we can do that with prices, with zones, that we, the community, control the way that we want our streets to be used and accessed. And so we want to do it in a way that helps the people who live here. Agriculture industry is sometimes described as hard to decarbonize. I think agriculture is probably more difficult, but it's not impossible. And so there's an opportunity, again, locally in states and localities for, first, conservation and improving our public lands and waters, and then finding ways for, with technology and services for net zero agriculture. So ethical AI is something that we worked on, or that my colleagues worked on in the White House. And my position is that the AI Bill of Rights, which is very important, that centers people and making sure that AI is equitable, we need to add a climate amendment onto that AI Bill of Rights, and to make sure that as AI is rolled out, it's equitable, it's people-centered, and it doesn't cook the climate. And so there's an AI executive order that I worked on the climate and energy part, and then just 2 weeks ago, the president released a national security memorandum on AI that includes the need to understand clean energy sources for how we think about the role of AI. So when I add it all up, there was one more figure in that graphic that we showed to the UN in Dubai last year. And there was this green line, and it was like, the blue line gets us to where we are under our current policies, but we can make it to our climate commitments if we have what is called additional measures. And additional measures were other things that the Biden-Harris administration wanted to pass, future laws, but critically, it was action by state, local, private, and nonprofit organizations. And so we, the government, the government, they are already counting on us to deliver this state and local stuff. We're already on the hook to deliver it in order for us to meet our climate objectives. And now we have to go out and make sure we do that. So the last couple slides. the White House, the Executive Office building, you're kind of steeped in history. And one thing that always kind of took my breath away is right on the first floor, there's a room that used to be the Vice President's office. And during the Lyndon Johnson administration, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would come to this office to advocate for civil rights bill of 1965. And several meetings later, they were able to get that passed after a lot of hard struggle and hurt in that community, physical hurt on Bloody Sunday. So like after Bloody Sunday, Dr. Martin Luther King came to this room, advocated with the Vice President and then ultimately the President to get the Civil Rights Act of 1965 passed. And these are part of the history of what we've come through and what we can still advance and make change. In this room, we had our Equitable Electrification Summit reception, right? And so you think about the opportunities decades later that were enabled. You are now creating these opportunities right now for the future. So the future is not yet written. We own it. This is take your kid to work day, and my kids got plucked because they were older, and they put them behind the president for the TV shot for that day. And my daughter got to hang out with the president for a minute. We refuse to think about that something's impossible. Right? We can make possible what we want when we work at it. It's really hard work, but it's not that hard. And while we're doing it, we need to be having joy, and we need to be standing up for vulnerable folks, and we need to be making sure that we're all in this together. And so I'll leave with this one. So the picture I showed in the first slide was the White House in the morning. I would take these pictures all the time when I would come in and out of work. And when I was leaving, I would always take a picture sometimes when I remember to leave down the steps there of the White House at night. And so we have the opportunity to make the light. And I'm very confident that when we work hard together, that we will. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Costa. That's great. You spoke so much about local governments, and it made me think about my own past. I spent 8 years in the New York City Mayor's office grappling with a lot of these issues. But I'm really curious, and I think looming large in everybody's minds right now is, what does this all mean? But I wonder if we could start almost with things that you learned over the course of your time. I mean, coming into a role like the White House, I assume there was all sorts of things you didn't even know that you didn't know. And you sort of left that experience with a sort of keener sense of how decisions get made, what types of things are possible, what levers exist. So I'm wondering if you could talk about things that you learned from that experience as someone with the training that you had going into a role like that, and then what that informs about how you're feeling about this current moment and what we should be thinking about, concerned about, excited about, if there is anything.
Well, thanks, Ben. I appreciate being here. From an optimistic perspective, the thing that I realized by working in the White House is I was supremely privileged every day to walk through those gates and be there with all my colleagues who were working tremendously hard. And it's because of that hard work that a lot of stuff got done. And I never want to take that away. But the kind of the optimistic part is, it's not that hard to get big things done when you want to do them, right? And so you may have the same experience from local government. It's like, hey, we should do this. And all right, how do we do it? All right, we write this memo, we release some money, and can really improve somebody's lives forever. And so I think that that's something that is lost is like in policy land where like, well, this is a PDF or this is an Excel sheet. It's somebody's mom, right? It's somebody's brother, it's their kid that is not going to get sick from asthma or have to go to the hospital with a heart attack. And it's not that hard to make change. Like, I really want to impress upon you all. Sometimes you go to an agency and you think that there's 100 people behind an initiative, and you get there and it's like, 2 people, and there's like some old coffee, and there's a picture of a cat hanging by a tree, and it's like it's hanging, and it's almost Friday, and it's like, you too, you're the entire operation. They're like, yeah, this is what we got, right? And so you can, that is the most optimistic take, is like, it's not that hard to make change, and if we're really deliberate about it. The thing I didn't know is that I went in, I'm a professor, I work in policy, like, of course I know this. Like, I knew nothing about any of this. I was terrible at all this, and I kind of relearn all my skills about how do we communicate policy, how do we think about benefits, how do we convince decision makers who are busy and thinking about 100 different things without our charts and graphs, right? And so there's a whole bunch of ways that I think even in our science communication that we could be relearning how to be brief, how to be clear, and also how to kind of advocate based on evidence.
We're sitting here at Cornell, sort of world-class research institution, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your view of American science institutions like this and their role thus far in sort of taking action, evaluating, and understanding the climate challenge, and sort of our role going forward, both the next 4 years, the next 100 years.
That is a challenge.
And interim steps.
Yeah. The U.S. Higher education is the jewel and envy of the world. And our research ecosystem, thanks to decades of investment, is unparalleled. And that has enabled opportunities for the country way beyond the important but still too small sums of research investment that we do, because those are the types of ways that we're creating the future. So number one is obviously we need to maintain and enhance the way that we are investing in research and development. That includes everybody. That includes not just our wealthy institutions, but all of our institutions, our tribal and community colleges, our trade schools, our land-grant colleges. Everybody has an opportunity to be part of the economic innovation engine of the country, which is this higher education research system. But second, I think is more like we should not lose sight of what our mission is as a higher education institution, period. And that is to enable our students that are in our charge to learn and grow and develop into systems thinkers on their own, while ensuring that they are free from the kind of discrimination from the outside world that is going to steal their time. And I think at this time, it's important that we as educators and faculty discover that responsibility for a duty of care for the students in our charge.
Thanks. I think there's a stretch of time now in the next couple of months before the administration changes, both among your former colleagues in the White House and in the executive agencies, maybe even in the Congress in the lame duck period. I wonder if there's anything that you're sort of keeping an eye on, things that people who watch this stuff closely might be interested in. There's been talk of a permitting bill, for example, in Congress that would have a pretty serious set of consequences for the possibilities of climate action, but also things that might be happening across the executive branch as we prepare for this transition.
Yeah, I mean, this is what is the theory of change here? And what are the opportunities available during this period versus opportunities that may be available either immediately next year or years after? And for me, we need to be connecting and advancing clean energy and housing as fast as possible without sacrificing and without looking at equity as something to be traded off or taken away. We need to be ensuring that we are deploying and building and leaving nobody behind. There are, without getting into the specific of this specific bill, but there are always going to be bills like this that have provisions that some folks like and some folks don't like. I think if we start from a position of let's not make cumulative burden on communities worse, and let's accelerate the growth of the things that we want, clean energy, housing, clean transportation. There is an opportunity to do bills that are good for everybody. Now, that sounds nice and important. If we don't do permitting reform for clean energy, we won't fulfill our climate commitments. We'll have more pollution. We'll have more both carbon pollution and air pollution. Our costs will be higher. So, like, if we need to be connecting all the solar, wind, and batteries we can to the grid in ways that don't destroy ecosystems, don't overburden communities, but needs to be fast. Like we are against the clock here. And so I think it's, first build up state capacity in state and local government as well as the federal government to make sure that we're able to quickly review and take into concerns around environmental impacts. We should think about ways that we can do broader areas of I was going to say categorical exclusion, but that's the jargon. Broader areas where we should say these are areas where we're pretty confident the impacts are going to be low. We could be connecting and building here, and ramping those up quickly. I think it's important for us in the climate community to know that every day that we're not connecting new solar and wind or in batteries and making EV charging stations is time we can't get back. And so the thing that's important around carbon pollution that is different from air pollution is that carbon pollution for our timescales is forever. We are still surrounded by some of the CO2 from the first steam engine, from the Transcontinental Railroad, from the Titanic. Every ton of CO2 matters because it stays there for hundreds to thousands of years, but forever for our purposes.
So before we go to questions, and I would love to hear what folks have on their minds, there was a theory of change for many who are sort of advocating for what became the Inflation Reduction Act, that sort of an industrial policy positive feedback loop where there would be, major new federal investments in companies and industries of the future, and those companies and industries would then become powerful stakeholders to keep this support from the federal government going. And, I think we've seen a lot of investment in Republican states, even though there was not a single Republican vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, but subsequent to that, a lot of new battery facilities, industrial facilities have been built in a lot of these states. Plenty of Republicans have shown up to ribbon cutting, celebrating the investments in their communities. I'm wondering how you sort of see that theory of change playing out, whether you're cautiously optimistic or you feel like that was always a little bit excessively optimistic from people who pushed for that type of thinking.
Yeah, thanks. My voice is dying all day, so you start riffing.
I don't know how my sense is, I'm really not sure how true this will ultimately be when push comes to shove in what I think will be a very complicated negotiation, particularly around the extension of the Trump tax cuts, where they're going to be looking for all sorts of ways to pay for these major new objectives that they have that are non-climate related. And even if all things being equal, they don't mind these new subsidies if they need to sort of take from it to support their own other pieces of their agenda. That would be something that that they would be willing to trade away. But I'm curious, do you want to nod? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Well, let's see. So I've been talking all day, and all the last 5 days, so I'm at kind of like the end of where I can go. Let me try.
Okay.
in the White House, we never cared about who is voting for the stuff that we wanted. Investment goes to red states, red counties, blue counties. Who cares? These are people. And that is the guiding principle of lifting up everybody, not leaving anybody behind. I don't know if that worked politically. It's right morally. And I think that the Inflation Reduction Act project, because it's a 10-year window, will come into focus as one of the most consequential pieces of legislation that we passed in the last many decades. But there needs to be a durable coalition that holds it together.
Thanks. Why don't we open it up to questions? Yeah, here, I don't know if, do we have?
We'll come around with the microphone. This is just me trying to get out of questions by faking my voice is dying.
Thank you for your lecture presentations. My name is Laura. I'm Humphrey Fellow here at Cornell. So I work on environmental policy and climate change back in Kazakhstan. So it would be interesting to know, considering that you are having some problems with your voice, I'll ask questions yes or no. So first question is, do you have any experience working in harsh environments where like the weather goes down to minus 35, 40 in Celsius? Because that is the case in our country, in central, northern, and eastern parts. A very cold winter, which lasts for 5-6 months. And it's very difficult to switch from coal to alternative energy. Now we're trying to switch from coal to gas. But when it comes to solar energy, it seems to be impossible in this kind of harsh environment. Maybe you have some like experience, yes or no? And the second question about your course called Climate Change Adaptation for Infrastructure. That course is available for the public or only for the students at Carnegie Mellon University? Thanks.
Thank you so much. So on the course, it's a course that is in our graduate program. On cold, yes.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your lecture. I was wondering, you mentioned that there's 2 strategies that people can do about securing or advocating for clean delivering, or you put the Amazon picture there. I'm curious about how an average community member can actually participate in that, as well as how can an average community member actually participate on the request for clean construction materials? It doesn't seem very clear to me how one would do that.
You want to start this?
I actually can. So there's sort of 2, one, the sort of new delivery options in your community. My sense, at least, is there's probably a role both for the most empowered municipal and local governments, but potentially also state governments in sort of regulating how deliveries are made in their states. Certainly, in my experience in New York was we worked a lot with the actual freight delivery companies operating in the 5 boroughs, so UPS, FedEx, DHL, and they had big infrastructure systems and a fleet of trucks, and we would call them and say, hey, we would really love it if you were able to make a lot of your neighborhood deliveries using much smaller vehicles. What would that take? And sometimes it was they needed extra money. Sometimes they actually needed stuff from the local government, physical space, a rule change to allow certain types of, the width of a delivery bike became a very big deal in New York State. We had to adjust a state law to legalize a slightly wider delivery bike, so DHL could do a lot of the local, hyper-local delivery. So just sort of going to your local, whether it's your mayor or your state legislative representative or city council and saying this is something of interest, there's all sorts of levers that they can be pulling if they know that people are interested in that, and this is something you'd like to see. On the purchasing coalitions, my sense is it's some combination of local government, sort of public authorities who buy a lot of concrete, people who do a lot of physical construction, also probably a state, certainly governors, there's a real role for governors to lead on when they're building big public civic construction work with state funds to buy maybe slightly more expensive, but to pay that sort of green premium for some of this stuff. But does that sort of comport with your vision?
Yeah, I'm sorry, y'all. I'm trying to do my best here. States right now have a buyer's club for their leased vehicles and their cars. So they'll go to Ford and they say, Ohio and Pennsylvania and Maryland all want 1,000 cars. And so they're able to negotiate as a buyer's club. And there could be opportunities at the state government level to do that for cement, steel, and other stuff.
As a follow-on to her question, I'm excited to do something personally, to take action. Are there resources that I can access so that I can take direct action? Is there some kind of a guideline that's more specific than you should contact somebody and do something? Where can I find that?
You want to start on this?
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of local environmental groups and chapters, folks really interested in climate action of all different stripes, and depending on the particular issues you might feel most passionate about or the things that really drive you. Maybe we can talk after if there's particular groups here, and if you're based in Tompkins County that you might be interested in getting involved in. But yeah, I mean, I loved your sort of flagging of local housing and transportation issues are something that is really, there's an enormous amount of power that rests in very local officials on how communities look and feel and how easy it is to get around by different ways. And so my experience working in those areas is it can feel very empowering because you're literally talking to the people who make the decisions, and the decisions get made, and then communities can start to change right before our eyes, as opposed to like the electricity grid and where power plants are sited for the next. It can feel a little bit more remote.
Yeah. So adding to that, if a New York State representative or New York State senator or a Ithaca council person gets a phone call from one of you all, like 100 alarm bells go off in these places. Nobody calls them, right? And you can call them anytime you want during the business day and say, I like climate change and I vote. And that sounds so ridiculous. And maybe that is a little bit too ridiculous. But you could say, I've been biking to work and I'm almost hit by a car a couple of times. Can we get a bike lane on Main Street? And that will at least start that conversation. And they will write you a letter back. They'll take your name. I mean, you don't have to. You can say, I'm from zip code, whatever. But nobody tells them what people want besides the business interest or lobbyist at the federal level. And all of you all should have your member of Congress on speed dial, even if it's somebody that you disagree with. And if something goes wrong, like you just dial them up, you're walking to class, you're walking home from work, it's like, I didn't like this. And the very nice staff on the other end of the line will say, thank you very much, I appreciate it, they'll note it. And when they tally those things up, and those are a big way that, if anybody's ever interacted with legislature before, like the emails don't matter. The social posts, and as much as social media besides Blue Sky even exists anymore, they don't matter, nobody cares. It's like you call them and there must be 10 other people like this person really mad about my pothole in my street or whatever. And so we don't use that mechanism because it sounds so silly, and it is silly, but it works. And then outside is just connecting with your local community groups that are actively involved in making change. And there's a whole bunch of different ways, and I'm betting that the Atkinson Center is a way to connect those, the type of work.
Hi, thank you for your talk. My name is Luke Jackson. I'm a senior in Earth and Atmospheric Science and Global Development. And this past summer, I started working for a company called Cherry Street Energy. They're a solar energy company owned by EBSCO. And I got a chance to get on the roof and install some solar, and also work in the office and analyze data around creating VPPs. So I was interested in, like, when you mentioned VPPs, and how AI is driving that. because we don't personally do the technology VPPs, we just would connect our commercial sites to battery storage and backfeed on the grid. So I was wondering, like, how AI kind of comes into VPPs and what you've discovered in your research. So that's the first question. And the second question I had was surrounding kind of the political climate that we're finding ourselves in, and how climate transition work is really blue collar, and it's outside, it's hard hats and boots, and how this really is like a good thing for the nation as a whole, and kind of how you feel like it will change, and how, you know, these clean jobs, these green jobs might appear or, you know, grow in number.
Thank you so much, and great to hear of the work that you did. I'm sure that had a lot of impact and was very exciting. I'm glad you're safe being up on the roof. Got to always be safe. The amount of investment in clean manufacturing has enabled to double the amount of spending in building facilities. So let me say that very carefully. It's like the construction jobs of building manufacturing have increased tremendously, and the amount of investment in building manufacturing facilities has doubled in this administration. The amount of power sector jobs driven almost entirely by solar, wind, and batteries is at a record high after a long period of decline. And so the way that climate policy also re-energizes communities has an economic ripple effect that is valuable and creates durable coalitions way beyond the individual work that folks are doing. It's the way that we, as a climate community, need to be building stakeholders and coalitions and political power in order to show that climate work helps people. I think that's something that we need to be recentering. It's climate mitigation and resilience improves your community in a whole bunch of different ways, and we need to be able to tell that story. Your second question is about AI. And so I've been taking a lot of heat on this on the internet because I've said AI is going to be creating a lot of energy demand, and it also has the opportunity to help with some climate mitigation resilience. I'm teaching a class in the spring on AI engineering and policy for climate resilience and mitigation. And it's our job as the community and as inputs to policymakers to say, we need to, before this rolls out, we need to make sure it works for the climate and for people. We don't want to be looking back 20 years from now and say, oops, like, sorry about that whole thing, we messed it up. We don't want to mess it up ahead of time. And so ensuring that these outcomes are good for the climate is something in our responsibility right now. And so one way that is often cited, and we want to make sure that we ground truth that it's true, but this is our experience, there's a whole bunch of different ways that AI and machine learning interact and different tools. It's not all chatbots and large language models. Just plain old machine learning kind of regressions can digest a whole bunch of data about tomorrow's weather forecast and tomorrow's electricity demand, and then optimize the way that solar and wind might participate in that market. Because you can look at every Tuesday in the last 5 years that has a temperature like this and cloud conditions like this and very high resolution data, and try to make sense to say, me as a solar operator, me as a VPP operator should say I'm going to have about this much power available at 1 p.m. tomorrow. So just on the weather forecasting alone, there's an opportunity to use AI, machine learning, computation, the internet. I mean, like, it's not all videos, like made-up videos of cats with lots of fingers, although those are adorable. A lot of it is just making sense of large amounts of data and providing some information for folks to do with it. And we have to do that in a way that doesn't kind of burn the climate with data center energy use.
Oh, I don't know if it's working.
Samaras,
Over here.
if you don't mind,
Sure.
how's your voice? Your voice is back. Okay, let's do one more question. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm a MS student in the mechanical engineering department, and I was I'm planning to specialize in energy and sustainability, but after recent events, I'm thinking maybe I should study robotics. Anyway, that was a joke. My question is about the equitable electrification and cooling. So if I got it right, your idea was that everyone should have access to housing electrification and cooling. I am not sure about the numbers, like, because electrification has to come through some kind of energy source. If we switch from gas powered to electrified heating and cooling. And also there are a lot of houses which don't have cooling right now, and you're saying if everybody has them, there will be an increase in the demand. Do the numbers in terms of cost and emissions add up to be carbon neutral? And just in addition to that, if they do, I mean, wouldn't having access to a good temperature for everyone kind of de-incentivize actually going out and working on the climate problem for people? Because if it's going to be all right in-house for everybody, people might not even care about the climate problem. Yeah.
I hear you. I think what I want to make clear is that, first, we have to get to a zero carbon electricity system as soon as possible. And that's why the load growth from data centers, the load growth from buildings, the load growth from cars, the load growth from factories, these are all things that we're actively dealing with right now, and we need a lot more clean energy to drive that, which is why enabling these resources to connect to the grid quickly is an important policy lever to make that happen. What I mean by equitable electrification is it can't just be people with high incomes that switch to a heat pump. And it sure can't be people who don't have access to air conditioning because it's too expensive to own it, or what, as I mentioned, my colleague Destiny Knock has found, it's too expensive to run it, right? So you have people die because they didn't turn on their air conditioner. Unacceptable. And it's not their problem to figure out the interconnection queue. That's society's problem. Like, it's our responsibility that an elderly, vulnerable person doesn't die of a heat stroke in July in an apartment. And that is a public health policy issue. These intersect, but you're elucidating very real constraints. It's like, well, what about cost? It's more going to be on the coldest day of the year is where we have to worry about it. It's the coldest possible day to substitute all electrification for all the natural gas heating that we do in not all, but many parts of the country. It's going to cause a lot of electricity demand. Let's figure it out, because the option of either still having carbon emissions or letting people freeze or die of heat stroke, all of those are non-negotiable non-starters. We're engineers and policy folks and lawyers and business folks and arts people. Like, we can figure it out. And it's what I am worried. I want to make sure that we don't artificially constrain what's needed because it's difficult.
I'll just add to that answer, or like ask another question on that. What do you think about geoengineering to solve this problem? Like spraying sulfates in the stratosphere to cool down such scenarios?
So there are several different mechanisms for geoengineering. What you're describing is spraying of sulfate aerosols into the air that reflect some of the solar radiation back to space and temporarily abate some of the surface warming from the sun's heat. And that could, I mean, we don't know, that could temporarily cool down portions of the Earth. There are lots of unintended consequences for ecosystems, but even at the base engineering level, it's a continuous operation, right? So solar geoengineering doesn't do anything about CO2. It just stops additional solar radiation from the sun from being absorbed and re-emitted by that CO2 in the atmosphere, making us hotter. And so all the CO2 is still there, and it's still going into the ocean and making the ocean more acidic, which then kills ecosystems. And then the second you turn off the factory that's spewing millions of tons of sulfate aerosol particles into the stratosphere or into the atmosphere, the heat comes back tomorrow. And so this stuff goes up in the sky and it eventually falls out, and it's like a continuous cycle. There is research and active research, and there's National Academies report around this. It's not my direct area of expertise. My policy recommendation is that we should research and understand solar geoengineering and understand the impacts. We should never have to think about using it as a climate abatement mechanism. We should be ensuring that if there, you don't have to be a country, you don't even have to be a state. You could be a person with some resources that wants to kind of do some geoengineering. So we need to solve the policy part of geoengineering. The technical part works. It works in as much as it reflects some of the heat and it stops temporarily some of the warming. It doesn't solve the climate problem at all. All of the CO2 and all of the impacts from CO2 are still with us. So we should research, we should understand while protecting ecosystems, but it's like there is not a world where that's our best solution. There is a world where that is some actor deploys it as what is potentially what they view as an emergency brake.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming, Costa. This was terrific. Thank you for this conversation. We have a small reception with some light refreshments out in the hallway there. Looking forward to continuing chatting a little bit more. And thank you so much for coming, and have a great evening. Thank you.